Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. My name is Brian Fisher. The program is Focal Point. The network is the American Family Radio Talk Network. I want to talk just for a moment. We'll take phone calls toward the end of this segment, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. And, the reality is, and I want to stress this, you're going to hear people all the time say you can't legislate morality. The truth is, it is the only thing you can legislate. And the people that tell us that you can't legislate morality, these are the first people out of the box to say when they're advocating for the bill or the law that they want passed, that it is the right, fair, and just thing to do. What are they doing? They're making a moral argument. They're saying we ought to do this because it is the morally correct thing to do. So let's forget this nonsense about legislating morality. That's what everybody wants to do. Everybody is seeking to legislate morality, and it's the only thing you can or should legislate. So the only question then becomes, are we legislating the morality of man, or are we legislating the morality of God? I've got a good piece here from the American Thinker written by Trevor Grant Thomas. And the title of the piece is The Truth About Legislating Morality. Oh, before I jump into that, let me mention this first. I want to go back to something I brought to you last week. Anthony Kennedy, who's liable to be the swing vote in the DOMA and Prop 8 case. Anthony Kennedy, been the swing vote on a lot of these. He wrote the abominable Romer v. Evans decision in 1992 that gutted a Colorado amendment to their state constitution, that said you can't propagandize on behalf of sodomy. You can't propagandize on behalf of this kind of behavior and make it seem normal and legitimate and a morally equivalent lifestyle to heterosexuality. You can't do it. Well, Anthony Kennedy wrote the opinion that struck it down. He wrote the abominable Lawrence v. Texas ruling in 2003 that overturned the sodomy law in the state of Texas. Now, apparently, Anthony Kennedy has had some opportunity to do some reflection. We don't know if this is regret like Judas showed or repentance where he's had a deep change of heart and mind about this. But this is the guy that's going to be asked to overturn Prop 8. And Von Walker, the federal judge that overturned it, he went to Anthony Kennedy's rulings in 1996 and in 2003, and he virtually lifted language from Anthony Kennedy's majority opinion word for word and dropped him in his ruling. So he was basically pitching this to Anthony Kennedy. There was only one judge he was thinking about when he issued his ruling, and that was Anthony Kennedy, because he believes, and I think he's right about this, Anthony Kennedy is going to be the swing vote. So we're in this horrid position. This is just so antithetical to what the founders had in mind that we should even be at this point. We're at a point where one man, unelected, unaccountable, is going to be deciding marriage policy for 315 million people. Now that makes it, whether he intended this or not, this makes Anthony Kennedy a black-robed tyrant. He is a dictator. He is one guy, and his decision is going to set marriage policy for 315 million people. That's horrible. It is grotesque. I mean, it is an absolutely antithetical to everything that the founders had in mind when they crafted the Constitution. Now, I'm looking at a piece here. I read a little bit of it last week. Let me just read a couple of paragraphs. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy said Wednesday, this is last Wednesday, that congressional lawmakers need to maintain the nation's balance of power by being able to compromise, expressing concerns, listen to this, that the high court is increasingly the venue for deciding politically charged issues such as gay marriage, health care, and immigration. And Anthony Kennedy is clearly uncomfortable with this. I mean, Anthony Kennedy now, who has imposed his tyrannical will on the state of Colorado in 1996, imposed his tyrannical will on the entire United States of America with Lawrence v. Texas in 2003, he's now getting uncomfortable with that. I mean, even he is recognizing, look, this is not the form of government that the founders established for us. Here's a quote from Anthony Kennedy. I think it's a serious problem. A democracy should not be dependent for its major decisions on what 9 unelected people from a narrow legal background have to say. And I think it's of tremendous importance for our political system to show the rest of the world, and we have to show ourselves first, that democracy works because we can reach agreement on a principle basis. And that's what happened in California. The people of California reached a consensus on a principle basis. We believe that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. And Anthony Kennedy says, look, we've got to show to the world that democracy, by which he means a Republican form of government, that it actually works. And we've got to start by showing ourselves that it actually works. He said, the article goes on, he said he is concerned that too many decisions of social and political importance are being shifted to the high court, particularly in an area of litigation explosion. So what this may indicate, and the timing of this would be very propitious, it may indicate that Anthony Kennedy is inclined to say on Prop 8, look, I think states ought to be able to decide this for themselves. The Constitution doesn't give the Supreme Court any authority to establish state policy on marriage. Marriage is not in the Constitution. It's not mentioned in the Constitution. Remember, Article 1, Section 8, it defines all of the powers of action of the federal government, all the things that the federal government can do, and dictating marriage policy to the individual states isn't in there anywhere. So no part of the federal government, whether it is Congress or whether it is the judiciary or whether it's the executive branch, can dictate marriage policy to the states. That's an issue for the states to decide for themselves. And this is exactly the principle behind DOMA. That's what DOMA protects. DOMA protects the right of the states to establish marriage policy based on their considered judgment. Their considered wisdom protects them from being dictated to by other states. Now, this piece that I mentioned from American Thinker, number to call, by the way, 888-589-8840. This piece by Trevor Grant Thomas. And I'll just read some quotes. He just assembled some quotes from some wise thinkers of the past about the purpose of law. Cicero and Thomas Jefferson, the guy that wrote the castration law for homosexuality in Virginia, Cicero referred to true law and said that true law is the, quote, one eternal and unchangeable law that will be valid for all nations and all times, and there will be one master and ruler, that is God, over us all, for he is the author of this law. So Thomas Jefferson traced a lot of his thinking all the way back to Cicero, and every word that Cicero just said, you and I could agree with that. There's only one law. It's the law that comes from God. He is the author of the eternal, unchangeable law that's valid for all nations at all times. There's only one master and ruler, and that is God and the law that comes from him. Now, John Locke, who profoundly influenced the founder, said this: the law of nature stands as an eternal rule to all men, legislators as well as others. So John Locke's point is that lawmakers are as subject to the eternal rule of the law of nature as the people over which they have some authority. The rules that they make for other men's actions must be conformable to the law of nature, that is, to the will of God. And you ask John Locke, well, where do you find the will of God? Where do you find the revealed will of God? John Locke would say it's found in the scriptures and the Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, William Blackstone, he was another favorite jurist of the founding fathers, and he said this. Blackstone's commentary is still read today. I mean, he's a giant in the field of jurisprudence and legal theory. These laws, Blackstone, quote, these laws laid down by God are the eternal, immutable laws of good and evil. This law of nature, dictated by God himself, is of course superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this. So Blackstone says, look, you have the laws of nature. They come from God, and you look at homosexual behavior, that's unnatural. I don't care whether you believe man evolved from slime through apes and baboons, or you believed he came into being by the creative hand of God. What happens in homosexual sex is contrary to nature. It is unnatural, and it is unhealthy, and it cannot result in procreation. Ultimately, the purpose of marriage is to bring the next generation into the world so that they can be trained and grow up to maturity and participate in the process of advancing man's benevolent rule over the entire surface of the globe. So ultimately, marriage is about procreation. It's not just about that, but that's the larger purpose, is to conceive children through the love that a man and a wife have for each other, to bring these children into the world, to bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord so that they in turn can expand the kingdom of God and the benevolent rule of man over all of the earth. That's the large range purpose for marriage. Now, conception, procreation, is a biological impossibility in homosexual relationships. That's why it is contrary to the laws of nature. To cause these things marriages, it's an abomination. It violates not only the laws of God, but clearly the laws of nature. C.S. Lewis said, quote, "Natural law, or traditional morality, whatever one chooses to call it, is not one among a series of possible systems of value. It is the sole source of all value judgments. If it is rejected, all value is rejected. If any value is retained, it is retained." So C.S. Lewis says, look, if you start tampering with natural law, with the law of nature, which all of these theorists says comes from God, the law that's written on the heart according to Romans chapter 2, the law that Paul talked about in the book of Romans, that comes from God, the natural law comes from God. If you violate this, if you reject natural law as the source of all of our value judgments, then you have gotten rid of value. Value from that point forward has no meaning. So this is the point, is natural marriage, as you and I understand it, as it's taught in the scriptures, it fits with natural law. It fits with the laws of nature and nature's God. And ladies and gentlemen, you and I, we should have absolutely no hesitation about defending natural marriage, about rejecting all marriage counterfeits, and saying, no, according to the laws of nature and nature's God, marriage is the union of one man and one woman, period, end of story. Focal Point, AFR Talk. Large